Welcome back after lunch. Thank you for coming back from the world of Portland. We are here for panel number 3, Is It the Box or Is It Me? Audience, Content, Interaction. And so we have 5 presenters today, and we'll begin with Brian, representing a string of people from Washington State University with the paper entitled The Interactive Role of Narrative Transportation and Program Familiarity in Television Programming Consumption.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Brian Gillespie from Washington State University, actually out of the Department of Marketing in the College of Business there. So this might be a little bit different than at least what we've seen so far. But I'm going to present 2 studies today that we did using student and human subjects, looking at the role of narrative transportation and program familiarity in program consumption. Clearly, we all already recognize the value of TV. That's why we're here. So we'll call this a couple of fun facts. Nielsen in 2009 reported that there were 286 million American TV viewers, and they watched an average of 158 hours every month. And then SNL Kagan in 2007 projected a 10-year consumption growth above 70%. It was about 72%. Now, knowing this, it's still interesting to see that we don't really know how people consume television. In particular, in consumer behavior, we really don't know. A very informal content analysis will show that very little attention has been given to this inside of my field of consumer behavior, an area that one of many that comm research is far surpassing what we know in marketing. So keeping this in mind, my colleagues and I recognized a significant gap and are trying to fill it through the idea of narrative transportation. For those of you who might not be familiar with the idea of narrative transportation, it's about the immersion of a consumer or a person into a presented narrative. It can be cognitive, it can be emotional, it can be imaginary, but the idea is that as you read a book or watch a movie, or in this case watch a television show, you basically leave where you are and you find yourself placed where the narrative is set. You might feel like you're actually interacting with the characters. You might feel like you are sitting in the room, watching what's happening, or as you read, imagining what's happening. But you're there. You're not actually laying in your bed watching TV or on your couch reading a book. You're actually in the presence of the narrative. Conceptually, it's very similar to flow. Again, that's kind of the transportation from where you are to somewhere else. The major difference between narrative transportation and flow is that flow doesn't have a narrative. That's when maybe you're just, as people say, in the zone. You're really doing great grading exams. You're really getting through it. It's very quickly. You're really focused on it. You're not paying attention to the things that are around you. That's flow. At least when I have exams, they certainly don't have any narrative. So that's very different than narrative transportation. And theoretically, it's very different than involvement. Involvement has a motivational aspect to it. You might get really sucked into something, might get really involved in it, but when that ends, you end up having some sort of motivation to do something. With narrative transportation, on the other hand, when it ends, when the story ends, the narrative ends, you're done. There's no real next step. You're not left with any kind of charge to do anything else. The narrative is over. You move on. Originally, narrative transportation was examined, and still the majority of it was examined in literature, which kind of makes sense. Everything is just kind of right in front of you with the more visual media. like television and film. With literature, it's much more obvious that there needs to be some sort of transportation because you're turning those words into these vivid images that you're seeing in your mind, and maybe you're really a part of that car chase that they're talking about in this book. So keeping in mind that very little has been done inside of television, we found another gap that we wanted to explore. And we do that in Study 1 in particular just to make sure that it works. So the impact of narrative transportation. The higher you are, the more highly you are transported into a narrative, the less likely you are to recognize plot faults or errors. Narrative transportation has been shown to increase evaluations of characters and create really close emotional connections with the characters. So as it stands, and it makes sense, if you believe that you're there, if you believe that you're interacting with these characters, you become close to the characters. All of which kind of lead to this idea of enjoying the narrative more. You don't recognize the plot faults. You have more positive evaluations. You have stronger connections to these oftentimes fictitious characters. Keeping that in mind, we start to wonder, okay, so what is the end game? What is the purpose of being transported? How can we see some sort of result? Well, we can recognize two things. One, in an advertising context, if you're transported into the narrative of an advertisement, say it's a commercial where there's someone running, and you really feel like, oh, as I'm watching this, I'm running too, or I'm exercising. We know that it can have an impact on behavior. Well, we don't know. We assume. We believe. There's evidence to show that narrative transportation can have an impact on behavior. However, we also recognize that there is a very strong link between enjoyable experiences and repeat consumption. I enjoyed this, I'm going to do it again. And we believed that the link between enjoying an experience and repeat consumption was stronger than the link between transportation into a narrative and its impact on behavior. So we came up with hypothesis 1, which is a mediation hypothesis suggesting that the mechanism between narrative transportation and program consumption intent, future program consumption intent, was episode enjoyment. And this is our proof of concept study. We developed our own stimulus, a TV show that was it was a 3-minute clip that was posited or was presented as a scene from a television pilot. And the main reason we did this was to completely control for program familiarity. Participants were 315 undergraduate students. They watched the pilot episode and then reported self-reported their transportation using the Green and Brock 2000 scale. They also reported their episode enjoyment and future consumption likelihood. And what we see here, using the bootstrap method suggested by Zhao et al. And Preacher and Hayes, is that the mediation stood, and it was indirect only, meaning that when you included episode enjoyment, the relationship between narrative transportation, the direct impact of narrative transportation on program consumption intent went away, but the indirect effect remained through episode enjoyment. So that supported hypothesis 1. We thought, okay, what's the next step? Well, we decided to look at program familiarity. We controlled by basically setting familiarity at 0 for the impact of the variable in the first study. In the second study, said, okay, well, let's see what happens if you add program familiarity. And what we know about familiarity, or what we think we know about familiarity, is that the more familiar you are with something, the more knowledge structures you create. And the attributes of the knowledge structure can involve more than just, say, attitudes towards something, but you can recognize In this case, are you going to enjoy a show when you watch something? If you've already developed this idea of whether or not you like it, whether or not you might enjoy it, whether or not you'll watch it again. As such, we came up with hypothesis 2, which is very long-winded. So the Cliff's Notes of it is that there's this mediational moderation effect such that as program familiarity increases, the role of narrative transportation on enjoyment of an episode and future program consumption dissipates. So narrative transportation won't mean something to people who are high in program familiarity. But if you're low in program familiarity, then that relationship that we saw in Study 1 should exist. So that's what we checked in Study 2. Participants watched an episode of 30 Rock. They self-reported their familiarity with the show, then watched the episode, then reported the same items that they reported in Study 1. The results here are 3 regression equations. I'm not going to get into this. If you want to know more about it later, please come find me. But basically, this was the outcome. For those who are lower in familiarity, we found the exact same results in Study 2 that we did in Study 1. The more you transported, the more likely you will watch the show in the future. For those who are higher in familiarity, the red line was null, suggesting that narrative transportation plays 0 role in the likelihood of future program consumption for those who are higher in program familiarity. Which again makes sense because those who are really familiar with it have already made up in their mind whether or not they're going to enjoy watching it and whether or not they'd watch it again in the future. Skip that. Managerial implications. The most obvious one to us is pilot episodes. Very low in program familiarity because they haven't been aired before. This suggests that those who are creating television shows, in particular, should really invest heavily into maximizing the likelihood that someone would get transported into a narrative. Especially considering the financial repercussions of pilot episodes. They're expensive and most of them don't work. Clearly film, especially original screenplays, narrative transportation can help out quite a bit. And then from an advertising perspective, clearly advertisers want to advertise in those shows that are successful. So this is a way to guarantee or to help a show become successful. I'm out of time, so thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Caitlin Ring from the University of Colorado presenting on The Biggest Loser, titled "Watching Your Way to Weight Loss: The Impact of The Biggest Loser Viewership on Perceived Self-Efficacy."
Good afternoon.
I'm just going to get myself situated here. What am I? Sorry. I'm a Mac person. I'm a little lost over here. You're from the beginning. Oh, got it. Got it. All right. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So as kind of the title of my study suggested, basically what I'm interested in is the relationship between watching The Biggest Loser, and don't worry, for those of you who have not had the pleasure, we are going to have a clip. But this is a weight loss show. I'll tell you more about it in a few minutes. But basically, you know, and I'm sure many of us know who are familiar with the kind of history of media effects research, that most of the time what people have mostly focused on is, well, what is the big bad box kind of doing to me, right? That's wrong. And so I kind of approached it, you know, not instead looking at all the potentially negative impacts of television viewership, but starting to ask, well, where are those, you know, if we will, glimmers of hope, right? Where are those places where television can help us change the way that we think, act, or feel in a positive way? And so a lot of times this kind of area is called pro-social effects. You know, you'll see research on things like the efficacy of anti-drug messages, that sort of thing. So, is what we see on television that's positive having a positive impact in our lives? So, again, just in case anybody hasn't seen it, this is a reality weight loss show. It's a competition. It's generally about 24 contestants when they start out, and they're competing to win $250,000. Whoever loses the most weight over the course of the season wins. There's also an at-home prize, and this is actually the 13th season of this show. So the franchise has been pretty successful. Let me just show you guys a quick minute so that we're all on the same page here.
Round.
I'd like to start. Okay, here we go.
Bob and Jillian have handpicked their teams, and they've even traveled across the country to surprise them. Bob's got all the married couples, and Jillian will lead all the parents and their children. And trust us, you've never seen a family get-together quite like this.
Where's the attitude come from?
What attitude?
Right. You look like you're going to punch somebody.
Oh, trust me, you know.
Husbands and wives will test the bond of marriage.
Come on! I can do it today.
Yes.
Tomorrow's another time.
No, today is tomorrow.
Oh, God.
And parents and children will test the bond of blood.
Do not get involved. Your involvement has brought her here. Do not get involved.
Which family will break?
Don't be afraid, Amy. Don't be afraid.
And get up on this thing and do it.
Jump!
Because Bob and Jillian will take no prisoners.
Grab the weight.
Jump! Jump! Jump!
The beat this 14 pounds off you. You're going to go home.
Left!
Holly, get them. Go over here.
Go, go, go!
Go!
Do not come down on me.
Hold it down.
This season, 8 families will put everything on the line.
Okay, so I think that at least gives us all a sense of what this show is all about. Close tabs. All right, here we go. Okay, and I will be the first to admit, the reason I thought of this, I'm a big fan of the show, love to watch it, and admittedly, the effect that it has on me, or that I would observe, is I would sit and open up, Ben & Jerry's has that pint, right? Grab a spoon, kick my feet up, and watch other people exercise while I ate Ben & Jerry's. I don't know why that's enjoyable. But I thought maybe most folks are better than me. Maybe people get something different out of it. And so what I used actually to look at this and to shape the experiment I ended up doing was Bandura's theory of health promotion. And it's based on social cognitive theory, which I'm sure a lot of us know is essentially the idea that human behavior is kind of a mix of behavior itself, personal determinants, and then environmental factors. And so what Bandura's come up with is this idea that there are kind of key determinants for making health-related behavior changes. Anybody who has ever tried to lose weight, none of these are going to seem like a surprise to you, right? Knowledge of health risks and benefits. Things like, it's better for me to eat grilled chicken than fried chicken, right? Goals, outcome, expectations. Are you more successful when you have a goal of 1 pound a week as opposed to saying, all right, I got to lose 20 pounds, and where do I start, right? Perceived facilitators and impediments, same type of thing. I don't think I have enough time to get to the gym. I don't have the money to buy, fresh fruits and vegetables. It's so much cheaper to go to McDonald's or whatever it is. And then the last one, and this is the one that I thought was most interesting, is perceived self-efficacy, which is essentially the idea that you believe that you have the skills, the knowledge, the wherewithal to do the things that you need to do to engage in said behavior, whether it's trying to lose weight, whether it's quit smoking, whatever it is. And so essentially my research question was, will exposure to The Biggest Loser, increase viewers' perceived self-efficacy regarding their ability to establish and maintain a healthy weight through appropriate diet and exercise behavior? Essentially, I'm just wondering, will seeing other folks lose weight, especially people who are extremely overweight and or obese, will that motivate people in some way to believe that they themselves can lose weight, is essentially what I was looking at. And my hypotheses were that exposure to the program would essentially increase participants' perceived self-efficacy regarding their ability to both exercise and maintain a healthy weight, and then engage in healthy diet and exercise behavior. So establish and maintain a healthy weight, and then engage in healthy diet and exercise behavior. And what I found was no, none of this is true. Watching The Biggest Loser did not have statistically significant impact on the extent to which people felt like they could engage in healthy diet and exercise behavior. In fact, it was the opposite. So, well, unfortunately, and actually, I should tell you guys just really quickly, let me back up. The experiment I conducted, I only had about 42 participants, and that's one of the biggest drawbacks, I think, of being able to say, you know, would a larger sample size establish more significant results. But what I essentially did was had a control group and an experimental group. The control group watched a half hour of Big Brother, which I used as kind of the generic reality television program. And then the other group watched Biggest Loser, and before and after the exposure to the program, I gave a pre-test and a post-test, and I had actually used research that had been done on self-efficacy to try and find the right tools to measure that. And so, you know, I asked things like, you know, even on a busy day, I believe I can eat right, you know, or even when I'm tired and stressed, I can make time to get to the gym. You know, there were different ways of looking at that. And like I said, unfortunately, none of the hypotheses were statistically significant. However, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the question on both the pre and post test, it didn't change for this one at all, was how do you feel about your current weight? And then the respondents were able to say, you know, I would like to gain X pounds, right? Especially for males, potentially they wanted to bulk up, right? I would like to lose X number of pounds, or I'm happy where I am. And what I thought was really interesting is the group that watched The Biggest Loser, in the pre-test, they, on average, said, each person said they wanted to lose about 5 pounds. On the post-test, that number had gone up to just over 7 pounds. And that didn't happen, in the Big Brother group. And so what essentially it points to is this idea that seeing other overweight folks lose weight makes people at least want to lose weight. Now, it doesn't necessarily increase the perception that they have the tools or the skills to do that, but it is having some impact there. And so I thought that was fairly interesting. The other thing that I noted was, and again, this was approaching significance for a Pearson correlation. I think it was like 0.006 was the result. But looking at watching Biggest Loser, you were actually less likely to like the way you look. One of the things that I looked at was a little bit of body image as associated with before and after. And people who watched Biggest Loser reported that they liked the way they look less after watching the show than the Big Brother folks, indicating that at least perhaps, again, it's getting people thinking about their own body image, their own health and wellness, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, in the end, I think that relationship that I just mentioned between body image and the show may be an interesting place to go back for additional research. Again, with the small sample size, my N was 42, so I think with a larger sample size, would I see different results? Same thing, this was a one-shot kind of deal, you know, a 1 half-hour segment exposure. You know, would a prolonged exposure on a regular basis change these results? And then lastly, you know, is it something about this type of reality weight loss game show format that's impacting people? You know, there are all these kind of, I'm sure you guys have seen, you know, Discovery Health, you know, My 600-Pound Life. I mean, there's a lot of shows out there that look at weight loss, et cetera. And so I am curious to see, you know, whether a different show may make a difference. And then the last thing I think, you know, I chose going back to Bandura's health promotion theory. I kind of chose to look at self-efficacy because that's what I felt was the most important, or one of the driving forces, and that's what the literature shows. But potentially, you know, things like perceived facilitators or impediments may actually be greater determinants of whether people engage in that weight loss behavior. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, up next we have Natasha Patterson from Simon Fraser University, the paper Exploring Women's Participation in Canadian Reality TV Competition Shows.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not as active as the other participants, but so this presentation today is based on dissertation work, PhD study that I conducted interviewing some women who had competed on competition shows in Canada, with the exception of one former contestant who had competed on an American show. So in the wake of the suicide of reality show participant Russell Armstrong, husband to Real Housewife Taylor Armstrong, debates about the ethics of reality TV were reignited as questions and concerns were raised about whether reality shows put undue pressure on participants. This event spawned a number of news articles which put the spotlight on the production practices employed by reality show producers, questioning the values embedded in the genre and resuscitating the moral panic debates which define much of the criticism and reception of the first wave of contemporary reality TV. My own research on Canadian women's participation in reality competition shows suggests that there is much to be critical of, at the same time that there has also been much to celebrate, with regard to audiences' increased presence in the televisual landscape. Today I would like to highlight a couple of moments as revealed through the women's narratives around legal issues and concerns and their treatment during filming. My work addresses the general lack of engagement with the social and economic fallout for participants in ways that account for their motivations to participate, as well as their treatment on the shows, and that ask why these issues don't seem to matter more in general discussions about reality television. Early criticisms of reality TV participation tended to fall into two camps. One, that participants are exploited by the media industry for entertainment and profit, and two, that it holds much democratic potential because audiences are no longer passive consumers, but actively engaged in the construction of television texts, such as deciding the outcome of a competition show. And third, a popular perception that reality show contestants manipulate or take advantage of reality TV to serve their own ends. My research demonstrates that participation in reality television cannot be reduced to one of these perspectives, but must be understood as a complex and often tenuous process in which participant agency, democratization of media, and relations of power embedded in the audience-producer relationship take place simultaneously. These power relations are encoded in the very structure of the programs and framed with common-sense neoliberal discourses about responsibilization. As some reality TV scholars have argued, reality TV serves to govern audiences from a distance by teaching us how to become proper citizens in a market-driven neoliberal era. These discourses of personal responsibility shape our understanding and reception of the contestants. Television audiences are encouraged and invited to judge and ridicule contestants, especially blaming them for their failures. My research interviews revealed that many contestants also internalize these discourses and similarly blame themselves, thus reproducing the neoliberal tenet that they are ultimately responsible for their successes and failures on the programs, and that it was their poor choices or personal mismanagement that led to their ejection from the program. Despite this, many of the women held contradictory views that seemed at odds with these neoliberal discourses by subtly, and not so at times, holding reality show producers accountable to a degree for their treatment, but generally the predominance of such common sense perspectives overshadows these production practices, letting reality show producers off the hook for their, least often the ones held to the same level of responsibilization. One of the main issues addressed in my interviews with former reality show contestants revolved around the dreaded contract, or as many of them referred to it, the Bible, due to its size and level of detail. Many of the contestants expressed that they were initially scared of the document and worried about the legal ramifications that could ensue if they breached any of the rules. As one woman commented, "I don't understand this language. Like, what are they talking about? All the legal mumble jumble. They tell you you might want to get a lawyer to help you with this stuff and stuff like that, but the biggest thing was you could get sued for $1 million for disclosing anything confidential about the show." And I'm like, $1 million? That kind of scared me. Interestingly, her comments that the producer suggested she might want to get a lawyer, and indeed in many of the interviews, the women implied and felt that they were not well supported or informed about these legal issues. Instead, many of them were left to their own devices, which led some participants to sign the document without seeking the services of a legal professional. In some ways, This illustrates or reinforces the notion that reality TV contestants are devalued and not well respected, given how few rights, if any, they have concerning their participation. Interview subjects also address the kinds of rights that reality producers held once they signed the contract, namely rights to all content produced for the show, promotional materials, also rights to the work and resulting creations produced during their time on the show. For instance, any songs they performed or clothing that they designed, anything like that. As Deborah Halbert writes, quote, reality television has created a new group of celebrities who do not own their public image and cannot independently control its use, end quote. Many of the women commented on how the producers could basically do whatever they wanted. In response to the looming threat of legal action and the loss of control over their image when they signed the contracts, the women participants tended to strategize around what they could control during production in terms of how they behaved, as many did not want to embarrass their families. Ultimately, though, the producers and networks do own their reality image and are at liberty to use their image in other productions for other purposes. As another one of my research participants, Susie, commented on this realization, I got a lawyer to go over it, and you're selling all of it. One of the things I had signed away was rights to my life story. Isn't that funny? So they could make, like, bio of me and put whatever they wanted in it. And she laughs at the end of that. Perhaps not so funnily, quote, such a participatory genre includes remarkably tight control over how people participate. The threat of legal action clearly reverberated across the reality TV landscape as some of the women I contacted declined my invitation to participate in the study due to these legal concerns. For instance, one former winner that I contacted basically told me she had signed a contract that made it pretty much impossible for her to talk about her experience at all. Another key issue that arose during the interviews was the treatment they received during filming. While I don't have the time to get into all these incidents, I just want to highlight a couple. So their treatment upon arrival and some of the gender issues around reality surveillance. As the interviews unfolded, a narrative pattern emerged when describing what happened to contestants upon arrival at the hotel prior to the show taping. Contestants were subjected to treatment that reads eerily like a prisoner entering a penitentiary. And here I'm quoting one of my interviewees. They take your passport and your ID, everything from you, and go through your entire luggage. They search your luggage, make sure you didn't bring anything. If you brought anything, they said you couldn't use, like you couldn't use a pattern book, or they would take that away, and then they took all your money. They take all your money and calculate all the pennies and write it down on a sheet, separate it and put it in a Ziploc and take that. So they strip you of all anything, so you can't even run, and you use a payphone or get in a taxi, take off, because you have no ID. You're nobody at that point. So upon entering the reality machine, contestants are stripped of all identifying documents. This form of control and monitoring continues for the duration of filming, even as contestants are left in the dark about some things aside from regularly scheduled activities. They often do not know what awaits them each day, and many noted how they were woken up at different times, usually without warning, by a camera and with a light being shoved in their face. Of course, many have and do counter such insights with the common refrain that, well, nobody is forcing them to stay and compete, they know what they're getting into and whatnot. To some extent, this rings true, but given the code of silence enforced through the legal contracts, there is still much silence and mystique surrounding the filming techniques used by producers, and most of the women I spoke to had only very vague and partially informed insights into this, and yet to expect them to acquire this knowledge places further burden of responsibilization. Of course, once there, many contestants are committed to the competition because they want to prove to themselves, whether family or friends, that they are competent and motivated, and so forth. Negotiating reality participation becomes a catch-22 for contestants, so on the one hand, we blame them for staying, but if they leave, we chastise and ridicule them for not being able to endure the competition, for taking away a spot from somebody else who really wanted to be there. So we need to question these accepted filming practices and take seriously the impact they can have on a contestant's emotional and physical well-being. As another former contestant commented, You know, it just seemed like a lot of the things that happened were unnecessary to get drama happening so people would watch. Moreover, some former contestants felt used, and once they leave the show, they are usually left alone to deal with the aftermath, which usually entails reintegrating into their pre-reality show life and feeling anxious and uncertain about how they will be edited when the show finally airs. Another issue which extends this critique is invasive camera work, is the reality that most camera operators are male, which raises questions and concerns about the safety, privacy, and bodily integrity of female contestants. 2 contestants in particular told me on different occasions, although they both appeared on the same reality competition show, that they were uncomfortable with the presence of male cameramen and that they would change in the closets to avoid being filmed and being subjected to the male gaze. So what can be done? Is there anything to be done about this? When I broached the idea of advocacy with my interviewees, I received mixed responses on this for a couple of reasons. Some felt that they had been given adequate information and training on the legal issues. Others believed that it was their own responsibility to figure out or know what they're getting themselves into. And those that did support the idea of advocacy identified 2 ways in which this could happen, primarily pre-show, by offering more support and resources concerning the legalities of their participation, and post-show in helping former contestants to deal with the fallout, as well as the instant celebrity that they usually experience. Skip here, I'm running out of time. Yet there are clearly unresolved issues arising out of the participation of ordinary folks in reality TV, and given the lack of protections and rights held by participants, these problems will continue to persist. Exploring women's reality participation reveals that contestants experience reality in complicated, contradictory, and uneven ways. Therefore, so to generalize so callously, as I had noted earlier, that all reality participants are somehow exploiting the television industry for their own gain is problematic, to say the least. I've been cut off, so that's pretty much that.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but in Q&A we can get back to more of these issues. Next up, we have Charlotte Howell from Georgia State University. The paper is The Cultural Forum Writ Literal, Engagement with Religion in Online Telefantasy Forums.
Regardless of how audiences watch television, which I'm sure many of us will be discussing throughout this conference, they are still watching and talking and typing and tweeting about television. In the foundational Television as a Cultural Forum, Horace Newcomb and Paul M. Hirsch write, "In its role as a central cultural medium, it presents a multiplicity of meanings rather than a monolithic, dominant point of view. It often focuses on our most prevalent concerns or deepest dilemmas. Our most traditional views, those that are repressive and reactionary, as well as those that are subversive and emancipatory, are upheld, examined, maintained, and transformed. The emphasis is on process rather than product, on discussion rather than indoctrination, and on contradiction and confusion rather than coherence." Calling television a cultural forum today may not be extremely contentious, but I hope that in my paper and my presentation, I explore some of the processes that are ongoing in this kind of discussing of the prevalent concerns and deepest dilemmas of our contemporary culture today. And through that, I'm focusing on discussions of religion, both religious identity and religious representation, in forums discussing the finales for Lost and Battlestar Galactica. I'll be vague with regards to the endings if anybody has yet to experience them. Why these 2 shows, both throughout their runs, deal fairly often with religious themes or religious representations, but they're always kind of up for battle with a variety of other themes ongoing. And most notably, both endings take a decidedly and explicitly religious turn. And so the fan reaction to those endings was especially interesting to me in discussing kind of how they're navigating and negotiating religion in contemporary American culture through their discussion of these finales clothings. So primarily I used online discussions in the Television Without Pity fan forum boards. They're publicly accessible. Primarily the subthreads focused on both these series. I also investigated a couple of articles and the comments in those articles on some sci-fi blogs, noticeably Airlock Alpha. In October 2010, months after the finale of Lost and more than a year after the finale of Battlestar Galactica, Tiffany Vogt, writing for the science fiction blog Airlock Alpha, wrote a blog post entitled, "Is Religion Killing Good Sci-Fi Shows?" In this article, she claimed that the explicitly religious endings of these two shows in particular, and she brought in Caprica a little bit as well, alienated the very audience that such shows seek to engage. Vogt, in this particular article, expresses one common trend in the discourse that I found, that religious representation on science fiction and fantasy television programs are a means to telling a story, but cannot be the end of the story. She writes, quote, "Angels, purgatory, limbo, and monotheistic, polytheistic religious wars each has their place in science fiction, but they are merely an element. They should not be the core of a science fiction story." Many of her commenters, however, disagreed, providing examples of the other major trend of this discourse. They discussed these shows' narratives or effective justifications for the series' religious endings, drawing on those threads throughout the series that touched on religion as being one of a variety of viable kind of core concepts, and instead of one that was marginal and should stay marginal. So this first discursive grouping, those who were basically felt betrayed by this kind of religious turn at the end, often make their adherence to genre rules the core of their argument as to why they felt that this turn was a betrayal. One Television Without... there's a visual example right there from the Lost finale. Throughout, I'll be putting up some quotes that were just kind of too good to leave out, but I won't be reading them. So one Television Without Pity user named Aloha Girl expressed her feelings of betrayal regarding Lost finale. Quote, "I am just mad because I feel like I was bamboozled into watching a show that ended up being about a completely different premise from the one I thought it was about originally." End quote. Some variation on Aloha Girl's articulation of "this show is not what I thought I was watching for the last 6 years" appear many more times in fan reactions that place Lost finale in opposition to generic expectations. Often this reaction is couched in a profoundly personal sense of betrayal that leads viewers to express anger as their main affective reaction. This sense of betrayal and anger appears more in posts responding to the Lost finale than to the Battlestar Galactica finale, likely due to the latter's more central dialogue with religion throughout the series. Both shows really kind of place religion and discuss it through character proxies, and depending on how you kind of saw the show, is how central that character proxy's relationship with religion could be seen. So Battlestar Galactica's finale garnered slightly different genre-inflected responses in the Television Without Pity forums than the genre betrayal post found on the Lost thread. These posts see the finale as a disingenuous modal shift away from realism, as well as a movement away from science fiction genre expectations. As user Pagan C writes on Television Without Pity, responding to a similar post by another user, there was no, quote, "there was no prior incident where there could be no other explanation but a supernatural one. Previously, the one true god or gods was wrapped in that ambiguity we both enjoyed so much. The finale took the story into the fantasy realm, whereas previously it had been gritty, realistic sci-fi drama. This is indicative of the prevailing inflection of most of the genre-based posts, both in the Television Without Pity boards and Airlock Alpha, that focus their response on Battlestar Galactica. The portrayal is not so much one of science fiction genre in favor of fantasy or melodrama, but one of realism tied to science fiction genre, and an ending in which negotiated and ambiguous meanings gave way to simplicity and a one-dimensional deus ex machina. Affective responses not dealing with betrayal are vastly more prevalent regarding, I want to go into a little bit more of the character proxies. On Battlestar Galactica, it tended to articulate monotheism with the coward/villain, and the Cylons, atheism with the admiral of the human fleet, and polytheism with the dying president/prophet. Each religion that the character became predominantly attached to vied throughout the series for the validity of their belief system, and each had an equal potential to gain that privilege until the finale. And that is what most of the kind of negative reactions with regarding Battlestar Galactica, this shutting down of narrative potential in favor and in kind of privilege of the religious narrative, was seen as a betrayal of the realistic ambiguity that the show had prided itself on showing throughout. On the other hand, with Lost, we kind of see the second strain of the discourse, with people reacting more positively to the Lost finale. We don't get as many positive responses to the Battlestar Galactica finale. Mostly it's, well, like great literature, we can analyze it whatever way we want. Who are we to say that the way that Ronald D. Moore chose to end it was not good? That's kind of the most positive it gets from the Battlestar Galactica fans. Lost, however, there's a more even split between those who loathed and who loved the kind of religious finale. Most who loved the finale really kind of drew on the affective connection among the show's many characters, and as well as between the characters and the audience, as justifying kind of why it was a good ending, or why it was at least legitimate. The result of the Lost approach is many more pleased, satisfies, or at least understanding reactions to the religious ending. Television Without Pity user Emmett wrote, quote, "I loved the ending of Lost. It was so ambiguous that it could be interpreted any way you like. Plus, I cried my eyes out, which I always enjoy." That the repeated notion of, well, I cried, I felt relieved, it was this moment of catharsis, is a kind of sub-theme of the more positive strain of the discourse. So supporters of the finale really often conceptualize religion as the chosen one of many avenues in the Lost finale that was taken to provide adequate narrative closure when it came to the characters. A more drastic contrast to yes. So I talked a little bit about, sorry, I'm going off script to try and shorten it. I talked a little bit about kind of as far as we go in terms of the positive discourse with regards to Battlestar Galactica. But in the within these kind of two discursive strains, there is a little bit of this self-awareness of that while they're discussing religion through the forum provided by these two television shows, there is this operation of cultural education and working out of these particular issues. So this is a really kind of interesting quote by Television Without Pity user Wondra, where she takes his position against those fans who felt unfulfilled by the answers provided in the Lost finale. Though his posts begin somewhat tongue-in-cheek, by the end of the post, Wondra is articulating what Newcomb and Hirsch theorized television to be: a cultural forum for understanding and negotiating our most prevalent concerns and our deepest dilemmas. Wondra touches on his own religious education throughout the show and the literal forum she or he has participated in. But a more complex avenue for exploring the process of cultural form is to note the repeated interjection of a poster's personal religious views, often in contrast to their reaction to the religion in the finales of Lost and Battlestar Galactica. And so this is really kind of the heart at the negotiation that's really going on. In recent years, with the increase of political conservative rhetoric tied to the conservative Christian religious movement, the negotiation of religion, belief, and disbelief in American society is an anxiety that appears to manifest in these moments of self-disclosure online. While not prevalent, religious self-disclosures appear enough to be a trend in both Lost and Battlestar Galactica finale discourses about religion. While occasionally these self-disclosures align with the fans' response to religion in the finale, as with our friend Aloha Girl, who writes, quote, "As a fervent agnostic, I simply can't digest the fact that the writers of Lost decided to make it all about hell/heaven/purgatory/faith, whatever, in the end," end quote. Most, however, of the self-disclosures counterbalance the poster's acceptance or distaste of the way religion appeared in the finale. Television Without Pity user Emmett said that he thinks of himself as an atheist, but he loved the Lost finale. And another user, Erroneous Lives, disclosed his beliefs while trying to make a point. I think I put Erroneous Lives down at the bottom corner. So he says, you know, "For myself, I truly don't believe in any higher power, any moment of redemption after death, any clarity that comes from the great beyond, which is why I try to make the most of life every day since it's all I have, and why Jack's fictional death, spoilers, was so inspiring entirely without the sideways flash." Similarly, a writer for Airlock Alpha, Michael Hinman, who was wrote a response article to Tiffany Vought's polemic, "Is Religion Killing Good Sci-Fi Shows?" responded in the comments to our article in a way that positioned himself as I'm not the most religious person in the world, but I have not been uncomfortable with the use of religion in the series. So I just wanted to wrap it up real quick. The reason why I chose religion is as Stanley Fish wrote in the Chronicle of Education in 2003, when he was asked what would kind of succeed high theory in the triumvirate of race, gender, and class as the center of intellectual energy, he answered religion. And so religion is often obfuscated. It's not discussed in the same way that certain other elements of identity politics are. And so I see this as a real kind of interesting avenue to dig in and really explore the power of the cultural forum.
All right, thank you. Last up, we have Filiz. Wrong accent on my part. With the presentation, TurkeyTV's Wedding Programs and the Changing Cultural Construction of Turkey.
Marriage and family types and methods have been changing in parallel with the changes in Turkey's social structure. The effects of globalization and media help modern values, behaviors, and attitudes about marriage become widespread. The Western lifestyle displayed via television, the major entertainment means of Turkish families, as well as gutter broadcasts conflicting with the traditional family codes and causing confusion, lead to significant effects. Mediated wedding shows, virtual friendship sites, wedding sites, internet chat, and new types of marriage that became popular through other technological advances are now responded positively even by the most traditional people in Turkey. Different family models continuously pumped by the media lead to a rapid change and conflicts in the in-family relations and the role system of the traditional family structure. Violence fueled by honor killing and feud murders on the one hand, and the family structure illustrated on the basis of the Western lifestyle on the other hand, lead to cultural trauma in a real sense. Therefore, these wedding shows, the subject of this paper, will be analyzed to expose to cultural contradiction represented by media programs which reproduce traditional and regressive marriage practices in Turkey. Wedding programs constitute the type of TV programs usually broadcast on TV channels during the daytime, hosted by female presenters and watched mainly by women in Turkey. We can see these programs during the day from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. on 4 main Turkish TV channels. This study is based on a review of the evaluations made after in-depth interviews with women who watch wedding shows, and the main purpose of this study to evaluate the wedding programs broadcasted in Turkey on the basis of the uses and gratification theory within the framework of the respondents specified below. Before we go to these programs' analysis, I will give some brief information about Turkey's television rates. 98% of the Turkish population, or in other words, almost the entire Turkish population, watch television. There is at least one TV in almost every home. Here is the reading and watching percentages in Turkey. In Turkey, women watch TV for an average of 4.5 hours every day. Married women watch more than single women. Those that graduated from primary school watch more than those with higher education. Unemployed women watch more than the employed, and those living in the cities watch more than those living in rural areas. Retired women or housewives watch more TV than working women. Wedding shows, considered the most popular TV programs in Turkey nowadays, appear at the top of both the most despised and the most watched TV programs lists. In these shows, man and a woman sit at two sides of a folding screen and ask questions in order to get to know their prospective partner without seeing each other. The questions concentrate on economic assurances and good and permanent income. The candidate partners believe that money brings ease and happiness. For this reason, questions like how much do you earn, what is your monthly income, do you have your own house, or are you living alone have become the routine of these shows. In other words, financial concerns override love, respect, mutual understanding, and emotional bonds. Sometimes a candidate asks the other to have a cup of tea together. Here, drinking a cup of tea means to get to know each other and to take further steps towards strengthening their intention of marriage. Some candidates decide to marry after drinking a cup of tea together, whereas others leave saying, I didn't fancy him, her, but keep on sitting in the studio to hopefully search for someone else who matches them better. Very young people, middle-aged men, women, even elderly people. Now I would like to show some selections from one of these programs, and here is the one of the video. I hope it works.
Nereden geliyorsunuz acaba?
İzmit Kocaeli.
Ya kaçtı acaba?
26. Sizin?
Ben de 26.
Çalışıyor musunuz?
Çalışıyordum da beni yani geçici olarak çıkarttılar.
Türkiye en kısa sürede talibini bulan locanın en şanslı adamı İlhan'ı konuşuyor.
Bir evlilik yaptım. Çocuğum yok.
Evet.
Temiz kalpli, temiz, hoş bir insan olmasını isterim.
Evet. Bende o özellikler var zaten.
Yani ben de sizi gördüm. Temiz kalpli, duygusal gördüm.
Evet.
Peki İlhan ne için gün sayıyor?
So, let's see the other one. Okay. doesn't work. Anyways. We see economical issues, as we see in the videos, economical issues always comes first, and families' approval is also very important for the couples. Before analyzing these shows, let us take a look at the changing social structure and its reflections on family life in Turkey. Turkish families' cultural codes has been affected by the change in a number of socioeconomic processes, including industrialization and rural-urban migration. Sociological studies on the status of the Turkish family structure throughout the social processes discuss the family on the basis of village family, urban family, and shanty family. According to those concepts, the structure of a village family meets the requirements of rural life, where the decision for marriage is usually made by the family elders. Marrying close relatives is prevalent. Girls particularly marry at an early age. Women don't have equal rights or opportunities with their husbands, and rate of Islamic religious marriages and birth rates are high. In an urban family, the influence of family elders in making decisions for marriage or selecting the partner is relatively low. In family, socialization tasks and relationship with the relatives are decreased. Control of family members on one another is weak. The age of marriage is higher, equality and consultation between couples is improved, the number of children is planned by the couples, and the rate of divorce is high. On the other hand, a shanty family emerges at the periphery of the cities as a cushioning mechanism of conurbation. It belongs neither to the village nor to the city, but has the characteristics of both as a reflection of cultural words specific of suburbs. Evaluation of the reasons for watching wedding shows within the framework of uses and gratification theory. For this study, 40 female viewers were selected by random sampling in various districts of 3 municipal zones of Istanbul with the highest population density. The respondents were females between the ages of 18 and 40. During the interviews, answered questions were sought on the basis of uses and gratification approach that constitutes the general framework of the study. According to the results of the interview, the wedding shows are watched mostly by women over 33, who are also married by way of arrangement, generally unemployed housewives, and whose household income remained below 590 per month. So we can say that women who watch these programs look like the characteristics of the shanty family described above. A great majority of the respondents who watched these shows were seen to have been primary or secondary school graduates. Therefore, it can be said that there is an inverse proportion between the education and income level and the frequency those shows are watched. Results obtained from this interview enabled us to answer questions as to why women watch these wedding shows and why they enjoy doing so. According to the results of the interview, having fun, satisfaction of curiosity, self-amusement, sharing experience, identification with their own lives, and letting of steam are the main reasons driving women to watch those shows. Respondents who watch those shows for self-amusement or to let off steam believe that the marriages made in those shows cannot last long. Furthermore, they think that such shows are not beneficial. The respondents also stated that they watch these shows to have an idea of the moral and cultural status of the society as well. The respondents who watch those shows reveal the moral status of the women participating there. The most noticeable fact reached in the interview was that the respondents who watched those shows the most were those married by arrangement of their family elders. In Turkey, broadcasting attained a different dimension with an increased number of TV channels and diversified program types starting from the 1990s. Producers who need to increase their ratings and therefore their profits from TV commercials make a number of sensational programs for TV, including wedding shows, which target women. TV channels have obtained the approval and confirmation of the High Council of Religious Affairs in order to make them morally acceptable and sustain the moral values of the society. It is also said that TV channels contract with costs from TV series in order to increase participation and keep audience interest alive. Intellectual circles consider these shows to be programs that divulge privacy, infringe the right of privacy, and banalize the sanctity of conjugal union. The assumptions that the media, society, and family life have nowadays progressively changed and modernized, and that women who enter business life at earlier ages than in the past have gained their freedom do not reflect the truth. In Turkish society, the father is still the basic authority in spending household income, is accepted by all family members. Generally, women, because in the shows also, we see in the shows that generally women in the shows ask them, the man, his economical sufficiency. Producers of the program state that they make such shows by taking into account the consent of the parents as well. In addition, when the meeting of partners turns serious in those shows, families of the partners come together into a studio in order to get acquainted with each other. To this end, it wouldn't be correct to say that Turkish family structure has changed or become westernized to a great extent. Indeed, with the globalization, urbanization, Turkey's traditional values started to shake but not to disappear. As we know, Western modernization has formed the individual-oriented liberal values, transformed the relations of a community permeated with religious and traditional beliefs, and thus reached a more heterogeneous, diversified, pluralistic social structure. But the response of the Turkish society against modernization is different than of Western countries. In Turkey, however, educated people have received the innovations offered under the heading of westernization with open arms, while society at large continued living traditionally. The modernist response of poor, uneducated masses modernized before attaining a democratic social life, completing the industrialization process and kept from being organized, has become reactionary. In other words, the response of the Turkish people against modernization has given voice to its aspiration to return to a more equitable and less variable, low-cost, traditional, and more human social relations and the social life of the past. Finally, the marriages which are attempted to be formed in the wedding shows are watched mostly by women married by arrangement, but through the efforts of the media, represent the regressive attitude in marriage and family life in Turkey against modernization effects on family life.
Participants can come up here and we will start fielding questions. So, please.
I have a question for Charlotte. That was fascinating. Did you see any fans from the other end of the spectrum? Fans who said they were religious and liked the shows even more when the shows had that religious slant?
Funnily enough, I don't think I saw any of that. It was mostly either kind of it was in opposition to how they felt about the religious turn as a way of justifying kind of their reaction, or it was, I'm agnostic and I don't like the religion, you've got religion in my peanut butter and it's not a good combination. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure that if I had, found a more conservative-leaning website that had a forum or a more openly, Television Without Pity, if anybody is unfamiliar, their kind of tagline is spare the snark, spoil the networks, or at least that was one of them. So they're kind of known to be snarky, so it's despite their extremely rigorous rules for the forum and very kind of hardline moderators, it's not exactly an open space for expanding, one's religious views, which is why I thought that all this self-disclosure was really kind of interesting.
Great. I have a question for Brian in regards to narrative transportation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it lends itself to look at gaming as well, or did you just look at television or like some crossover type application as well?
For this, we looked specifically at television. It's very easy to recognize that this could happen inside of gaming, and why I can't offer any evidence of it. It seems to me, it's at least it's very logical that it's probably an even stronger trait inside of gaming, because you actually take on the persona a lot of times with like these first-player games or whatever of a specific character, and there's much more interaction. So, yeah, I would assume that gaming is another realm where transportation is really a big deal.
Any other questions? Yes.
This question's for Natasha. My sense of a lot of the reality formats is that they cast people deliberately who they perceive to have latent behavioral or psychological instability. Did you find any record of that in your interviews with people, like with regard to screening before they cast the shows? Did they ask them questions like trying to get at those kinds of issues?
Well, the women I spoke with, part of the process is usually some type of psychological assessment, some type of form they have to fill out. I think in one instance, somebody, I don't know if it's before or after, actually talked, like you're able to talk with a therapist or something. But in terms of the people I spoke with as well, I didn't really have anybody who that was super controversial, who might have been sort of positioned as like crazy or sort of regarded in that way. It's tricky because I think part of it is like, despite what you think you might know, I think the impression I got from all the contestants was that once they were there, it was still not how they thought it would be. Like, so there's always like a lack of sort of knowledge or foresight into what to expect. You have expectations, but the reality tends to be different. So I think that reality show contestants are responding in very real ways to the environment that they're placed in, right? So I have difficulty sort of wanting to sort of judge them or sort of confine them that way. But
I was thinking more about the process of the casting, whether or not the people casting to try and find people of a certain personality type.
Well, I mean, I just talked to contestants, so they don't necessarily know the process for casting. But certainly in some of the popular comments made by producers, there's certainly an element of that. And right now in Canada, we're casting for The Bachelor Canada. And there was a recent article in the Globe and Mail, and a producer basically said, yeah, we're looking for a particular type of woman to cast. So, yeah, certainly. Anyway, sorry. I went off.
Yeah, I've got a question for Caitlin. I'm going to ask you to speculate just a little bit here. When you were talking about The Biggest Loser and sort of its lack of self-efficacy, I immediately thought of Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution for some reason. And I was just sort of interested about your thoughts about whether that may have more impact on people's health choices because it's not directly implying the personal. It sort of talked a lot about sort of society and policy, and whether that may be more self-efficacy, have more self-efficacy because it focuses broader rather than on an individual's.
Right, that it's looking at kind of structural issues that lead to these unhealthy choices or put you in a situation. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know if when I was talking about kind of future research, I really do think that the game aspect of The Biggest Loser, the fact that it's been around for 13 seasons, I mean, it's got its own kind of, specific like genre qualities that I think prevent people from connecting to it in a way that maybe something like whether it's Jamie Oliver looking at the structural things, or even I think, some of these that are like tracking, there's one that's actually just coming out, My 600-Pound Life, and it tracks this woman's progress to how do you take off 600 pounds. And, you know, if something, whether it's connecting on a structural level or an individual level, may speak to viewers, I think, in a different way, that I think the game show format is part of what's, I think, taking away from having that impact on efficacy.
And one last question.
I'll keep it for after.
Oh, okay. Well, then,
a question for Filiz. Is the number of arranged marriages, women, a high proportion of the population or low, and were you surprised by the results that you got?
Yes, in Turkey, arranged family, arranged marriage population is higher for Turkey. So this was the convenient. I mean, this was same with results of my research. It was the same results because Turkey has the same. Yeah.
Did not surprise you?
Excuse me?
The results did not surprise you?
No.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, everyone, for the panel. We're still talking in the back. What a great demonstration of the range of methods and theories for TV research.